All right, welcome back to Focus to Win podcast. So I have Alex Aanderud here from all the way from Arizona. So thanks for coming in today.
Yeah.
And you are the owner of You Don't Know Disc and
Human Spectrum.
Human Spectrum. Okay, good. So those who don't know what I'm talking about, disc, I'm not talking about an old floppy disk or some of you younger ones, a disc, D-I-S-C. So do you want to talk a little bit about that on layman's terms so they kind of understand what we're talking about for today?
Of course. So the DISC assessment it's a psychometric assessment. What it does is it measures behavioral tendencies. So in the early 1920s, there was a division in the psychological community where a bunch of people started to look at abnormal psychology. They wanted to understand why people were weird and how to fix them. They wanted to understand like what was going on. That's where you started looking at diseases and all these kinds of things. But there was a small group of people, Dr. Marston was one of them, William Marston, who wanted to understand and thought there was as much to gain from studying normal people as there was from studying the abnormal.
Okay.
And what he did was he was looking at 4 distinct character spectrums to look at behavioral tendencies: dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. And he looked and recognizing people operate along spectrums in these 4 different categories. And so the DISC assessment, as we know it today, is a tool that a lot of companies use to kind of put people into boxes and say, you're this kind of personality, which means you'll be good at this and you'll be bad at that. But how it actually began was, again, in the 1920s. Then flash forward a few years later, someone said, okay, cool. So how can we ask certain questions to be able to figure these out, like what these different spectrums are? And then all of a sudden you take this test and you get classifications. And then went into the business world. Then it started to be used for screening. Then it started to be used, and now all of a sudden it was, okay, oh, you are a D personality type. That's why you're this way. Oh, you're an I personality. And so the DISC, instead of becoming 4 distinct separate spectrums, it became what's your score, and mine's better than yours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then so it's kind of like it's
competitive edge then.
Right, competitive edge and kind of shifting. And who are you and what am I? And well, I'm this, so that's why I got this. But yeah, man, I can't ever do that because I'm this. And so we kind of shifted that. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting because in real estate, I always hear people say, "Oh, I'm a DI." I'm like, okay,
congratulations.
So you're right, exactly. I'm like, right. That and personalities change over the years, and like some of the key points you said, spectrums, right? You know, that's a really key thing of just because you're higher on one spectrum and lower on the other. Biggest thing is knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and like how are you best. I think if you know yourself the best, right? And some of it's being pointed out in these assessments, knowing, hey, these are the strengths, these are a weakness for you, so be careful. Or also strengths can be overused too. Right. So just be careful of that.
Well, and I think in order to understand that a little bit more, may I explain a little bit more?
Yeah,
about
please.
Okay, so the D, the I, the S, and the C. And D looks at how people tend to move forward. I is more about how people tend to interact. S is how steady or stable they tend to be. And then the C is how conscientious they are with the procedures of others. So when there are people who are up there who are teaching a DI personality, someone who's driven, focused for results, wants to keep moving, high I, outgoing, gregarious, loves talking to people, those are also the people who tend to be on stage teaching. And so you'll get the people who are up on stage talking about the S or the C personality type, but they're describing it from their perspective,
right? As
opposed to understanding the different types and how they all win. So DISC is 4 different categories. DISC, D, tends to look at how people tend to deal with problems. People who are high D, and we'll talk about where people have differences in like the standard assessment, but people who are high D tend to focus on results. They tend to be very driven, very aggressive. They deal with problems aggressively. So when you're listening to a DISC training, they're often going to tell you that's who they are. High I, outgoing, gregarious, love to talk to people. They're the people. You can't shut them up. That's what they say about the I's. S is that they're people pleasers, they're pushovers, that they're amiables, and that they just get along with everybody. And the C, they're all about process, procedure, attention to detail. Now, if you guys are taking notes on what I'm saying, don't write that stuff down or cross it off, because those are symptoms. Those aren't what they represent. So when I look at it, so I've got a background. I was an engineer supporting experimental flight tests for Boeing in the U.S. military. I'm a trainer of advanced integrative psychology, and someone gave me profiles, and all of a sudden I could put numbers to people. I could see patterns that even the people who were the experts within a few conversations with me started saying, oh, so what did you learn talking to Alex? They're like, I don't know DISC, which is where you don't know DISC came from, right. Is because people going, I
we
thought
teach
I
it so
DISC.
differently.
Yeah.
Like your perspective, like I was certified back in 2017 in DISC, and then when I was talking to you, I was like, wow, this is so different.
Right.
And that made sense of what you call it, I don't know DISC, right?
Well, there's a few different distinctions. So like the first one is behavior does change over time.
Can you move that board?
So behavior changes over time. And unfortunately, one of the standard things that comes up with the DISC assessment is like, once you have your DISC assessment, that's always going to be your DISC assessment. You're this, and that's always going to be it. Right. And I just asked the question, I'm like, okay, but DISC measures behavior. They're like, yeah. I'm like, behavior changes over time. They're like, yes. I said, so how does this thing that measures a movable thing not move?
Right.
And they're like, huh. I'm like, it's 1920s. How does nobody ask this question yet? And so that's one piece, is it changes. And so what happened was I would run a profile, and I did some psychology work. I'd help release baggage or trauma, depression, anxiety, like PTSD, like different things. And I'd run another profile, and I could start to show you how emotional baggage is affecting your profile, which makes sense because your baggage affects your behavior, and DISC measures behavior. So that makes sense. Yeah. Second thing is your D, I, S, or C. And they go, but they're 4 different measurements, and they all look at different things. It's like, yeah, but if you're a D, you're definitely not a C. I'm like, but there are DCs. They're like, well, yeah, there are. But, and so we started going through this thing, and I'm like, no. You have a score for all 4 categories. They're like, yeah, but the high ones are the good ones. I'm like, well, so you have a high D who's aggressive and loves to take action, but also runs people over and doesn't get, in like referral business, doesn't get as many referrals. Right. It's like, no, they get more business. I go, right. They get more business because they're aggressive and they go get it, not because they get referrals, because they didn't make a good experience. They ran over people.
Sure.
Like, oh, okay. Low D. Well, they can't make a decision to save their ass. Well, that's not necessarily true. That low D is intentionally moving forward. They make sure they have enough information. They help research. They help keep the thing safe. They keep it moving. So like these different perspectives. So what I did was I went, okay, so there's not a good or bad profile. Every profile is good. Right. It's a matter of, does the environment support it? So to help the people who are watching, who are listening, easy tells for the DISC. Want to be able to do just a quick tell. Right. D, how people tend to move forward. High Ds, whether they want to keep moving or they want to move forward intentionally. 2 points of the spectrum. High D wants to keep moving. They don't want to stop, which is also why a lot of high Ds get to 90% and they don't actually accomplish the goal, because if they accomplish the goal, they'd stop. So they get to 90% and they shift and do something else. Low Ds, it's not that they can't make a decision, it's that they want to be intentional and make sure they're making the right decision. So they're intentional with their decision making. So if you have a high D and you're working with somebody who's a high D and you need them to slow down, you're going to trigger them. They're going to have an emotional response. They're not going to like it. Right. Same thing. If you have a low D and you're like, okay, yeah, but we're pushed for time, we got to make a decision, they're going to dig their heels in because they don't want to be pushed. They want to be intentional. Right. So quick language pattern for the Ds. High D. Hey, I know it's really important that we're going to, that we get to this destination. Or I know it's really important that something about moving. Mm-hmm. If we spend 10 to 15 minutes right now working on this, it'll probably save us hours, or it'll get us ready so that when that opportunity comes, we're ready to go. So let's spend this time now so that when it comes, we don't have to slow down. See, I say that and you're already starting to smile. You're like, I like that. I haven't even said what that is. That's the high D going, yeah, I like that.
Well, that and motivators too, which we'll get into, I'm sure, too. So it's like...
So then the low D personality type, you flip it. And the low D is really about going, okay, so they need time and information. So install it. Lee, you've been thinking about this a long time. I know you've really been processing a lot of stuff, and I want to make sure that we're making the right decision as we move forward. So I just want to go ahead and let's talk through this and make sure that you feel good with what we're doing. I'm still pushing you to make the decision, but you've been thinking about this for a while, and there's a lot of information that you've gone through. I'm installing it in my language, which makes you more comfortable having the conversation about moving forward.
So true. Well, because I think of sales. Sales is all like, we're selling to our kids, we're selling to our spouses, we're selling all, constantly. It doesn't matter if you're in line getting something, you're constantly selling somebody something, because some people are like, oh, I don't want to be sold to. It's like, you don't have a choice. You're getting sold to no matter what. Yeah. But it also, if you know how to communicate, and also the key words that you're using there. So that's what it's like, understanding the profile, who you're communicating with, and how they want to be communicated with.
Right. And I think one of the biggest things with that is it's really about influence. Is if you communicate in a way that's ineffective, you're not giving them the chance to make a decision that's right for them, because you're now dealing with their baggage and their resistance to what you're doing as opposed to their authentic belief.
Sure.
So you have a high D and you want them to slow down. They're triggered they can't actually slow down and be supportive even if they want to, because you haven't given them the language to be able to respond. Instead, they have to be defensive.
Right.
And so by
giving them
you, yeah, exactly. So it's like with your language, you can actually disarm, which then allows them not to make your decision, but to make the decision that's right for them.
Yeah. So anybody listening to this, like, go back and listen to those segments again, because it's super helpful when you go back and listen into the exact verbiage that you're using. Is so much more helpful than, because people will say, oh, I said that. I'm like, no, you didn't. Like, record it once of what you said, play it back. You're like, I love the NFL commercial where they're like, oh, you said this. And they're like, no, I didn't. And they pull the flag out and then they go back and they watch the recording. I'm like, wish we could do that more often, because you said this. And I'm like, that's not, listen to your exact words of what you're saying. And that's what's so crucial, is like the verbiage that you're using is so key, but also the tonality to go with it. So if you're talking to an S or a C versus a high D, the high D, you're going to be a little bit more stern, or that S, you're going to be like a little softer, probably speaking a little slower, or the high D, you're going to speed up your speech. That's why I was saying fast and slow.
Yep.
Because that D and the I want to move faster. So you have to, and they're usually, like you said, more gregarious and type, they're going to speak deeper, louder, and all that. You kind of got to mirror and match that as well.
Right. And I'm going to shift your language, because again, you went the D and the I. This is what a lot of the trainers, when they teach DISC, is they say the D and the I. No, the high D and the high I,
right, yeah.
Because the low D and the low I tend to be a little bit more fast paced. But so does the the low D and low I tend to be a little bit slower paced. Mm-hmm. The low S and the low C also tend to be a little bit faster paced.
Yeah, because when I'm saying it, I'm thinking of what your dominant keys, right, which they're not hearing that. So,
but with the DISC, it's actually distance away from 50. So if you have a 65D and then you have a 3C, your C is actually more dominant in displayed behavior. Because it's the low score, but it's more dominant because it's further away from 50.
Oh, interesting. So again, that'll be speed. So if they're a low C, they're going to move much slower.
Faster. If they're a low
C, okay,
low C.
High C is going to move really, really slow. It's going to be like...
They want to be able to predict the result. And until they feel safe, they're going to be very cautious.
Yeah. Well, so one of my things was, mine was DI,
yep,
and dominant, anyway, that way I was more dominant DI, and then my S and C were lower. Now my S and C are higher and my D and I are lower, but my motivators are more of a D. So my motivators are saying make a decision really fast, and then my natural behavior is saying slow down.
Right.
So then you get internal conflict, so depending on how big the decision is. So I have to tell my leadership too, like, hey, if I'm not giving you an answer, so like when you need it, you need to let me know so I know that it's important to you. So I think of them knowing, like, I know my weaknesses and I know my strengths, but making sure that they know like, if you need an answer, I need to hear more from you of you pushing back to me, rather than, hey, it's, you think I'm just a SC that's going to just take longer. If you need a quicker decision, I can give it to you. I just need to know that it's important to you.
Right.
So that comes when we're, again, a little bit deeper on motivators. So, and we were talking about that earlier today. So you have, so many different profiles out there, right? But I think DISC is like one of the predominant ones out there. I know in the real estate industry it is anyway.
Yeah.
And then you have motivators that you track along with that. And then there's one other one that you're tracking too, like it goes even deeper, but tell me what that is.
Axiology.
Okay.
So it's the attribute index. So the assessment that I use, it's the Advanced Insight Assessment from a company called Intermetrics. And it has DISC, which measures behavioral tendency, values, which measures intrinsic motivators, and then an axiology report called the Attribute Index. And the Attribute Index looks at how people filter information and value information.
Okay. So the values itself, the internal values, how does that come into play? And like, can you hit on that in a layman's terms that people will kind of understand on a quickly with a not seeing a report, right?
Yep. Values are deep unconscious programming that help you evaluate like how you spend your time at the unconscious level. And then after it's spent, was it worth it or not?
Okay.
So it's what's important to you. And so values are a criteria that we use to evaluate the expenditure of energy and seeing if it's important and if it was worthwhile.
Okay.
And it's also what drives us to use that energy.
Okay. So now say, one of our audience members says, hey, I want to get they're going to get a DISC profile, which we'll give a link here towards the end. But and now they're looking at it. What, because we talked about that everybody's like, oh, I'm a higher D or I'm higher than they think one's right or wrong, right? And there's no right or wrong. It's just knowing your strengths and weaknesses. And for people to get the most out of that for themselves, how do you help them with that? Or what would you look at on a perspective of that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're taking the advanced insight assessment, the first thing I'd look at is the D, the I, the S, and the C. And I'd look for what are the highs and the lows. And that just tells you what are your strengths and
And that's
weaknesses.
more like so they can see it like a quadrant.
Yep.
Yeah,
So if you're a high D, high I, high S, low C, what does each of those mean? And so really to get good at reading or even understanding people, even if you don't have a piece of paper, being able to know what is the high and the low, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of those would be really helpful. So that's the first step.
Okay.
The second assessment is the values index. And for that, what you want to look at is anything that's over 60 on their scores, if they actually take the assessment. Anything over 60 tends to be used for decision-making criteria.
Okay.
It tends to be something that they lean on for making some of their decisions.
Okay.
So aesthetic, looking for a feeling of harmony and balance. Economic, return on investment, what's in it for me. Individualistic, being seen as unique and different. Political, taking care of my people. Economic, what's in it for me. Political, what's in it for my people. Altruistic is about taking care of the people. So it's impact, generation, masses. You have regulatory, which is about there being systems and structures in place and making sure that they have that safety and security that comes from systems and structures. And then theoretical, which is learning for the sake of learning.
Okay.
It's understanding that as you learn, you'll be able to adaptively apply the learning. So all learning is valuable.
Okay. So if somebody did one of these profiles and they're like, all right, trying to figure out what's, like our podcast Focus to Win, right? What would their focus be if they were looking at this to pull the best out of themselves? Is it just them understanding more about themselves, or like what would you say the perspective that would help them most?
If they take this assessment and they look at the values, you're going to have certain ones that have a score over 60. Everything that you do, every goal that you set, you should align somehow to that particular subject. So let's say, for instance, you have an over 60 in your economic. And your goal is, give me a goal.
Say for us, we want to hit 500 sales.
Okay, 500 sales. Cool, that makes sense. So 500 sales, it's $1 return on investment. I put energy in and get energy out. Now, if it was altruistic, it was over 60, and your goal was still 500, but it's now 500 sales. It doesn't do anything. That doesn't help the masses. Okay. So then create a scholarship so that every dollar that comes in goes to help provide scholarships for people. This is what I did because I was a high altruistic with no economic. I made my dollars mean something to my altruistic, which then motivated me to go get them.
Okay.
So give it a meaning that's related to your value so that you can tap into that value to drive your action.
I think of just like people in society in general. So what do we fight with the most? So it's usually like diet. We talked about diet earlier. So it's a matter of how do they look at that? Like if they are saying, is there something you could take out of this profile and say, hey, I know my strengths and weaknesses, or what do I need to tell myself? So is that something you would take? I know we've had a lot of discussion on so many different things, in the last few weeks. So I'm just thinking of like, how would this help them? But I know diet's an easy one, or working out versus, or, hey, I need to set my standards of what I'm going to do on a daily basis. And I guess depending on profiles, is that how you would coach them then to hit? So is there any easy thing that we could give to masses, because here we're trying to help many people and we don't know, where they're going to fall. Because, we talked about percentages. High D's is what, 7% you said? And then masses are more S's. Probably the highest quadrant is a high S.
Yep.
Followed by what, high C and then high I and then C, or is it?
I have the percentages.
Okay.
But
Okay.
Honestly, majority of what I do, I step away from any particular system, values, attributes, and I just look at the person.
Okay.
And everything that exists is a dichotomy, and it exists in a dichotomy that we created. So if I look at the D, and we talk about the high and the low D, I'm literally creating 2 points in which I can then put somebody in between those 2 points. That's all I'm doing.
Okay.
So percentages and all this stuff, I go, well, here's the thing. That high D who tests as a high D that's in the 3 or 7%, the day they make a bad decision and then they're second guessing themselves, they're going to be a lot more intentional with how they move forward. They're not going to be a high D for that 20 minutes.
Right.
So for me, it's not so much are you this or that. It's understanding that they all exist and they all exist in you. As far as being able to do something with it, understanding what are the strengths and the weaknesses. I don't know, from a time perspective, I can go through DISC and explain strengths on top, strengths on bottom, weaknesses on top, weaknesses on bottom. But if you just think about the symptom, if you think about the thing that it does, so like I talk about the high D, if you want to keep moving, what are your strengths?
Usually time, moving faster, getting things done.
Making decisions, right? Okay, so those are the strengths. What are the weaknesses if you want to keep moving?
Sometimes bad decisions because making a decision too fast.
Okay, sometimes you go the wrong way, sometimes you hit a wall.
Right.
Cool. So you just described the strengths and the weaknesses of a high D. So then if you like to be intentional with how you make decisions, what are the strengths?
Well, you're slowing down. It's one of the things, right?
Yeah,
Like,
you're slowing down.
You're thinking deeper of what that is. I think you're more methodical and getting more detail to make sure you're making a good decision, especially depending on how big a decision it is, right?
Right. And so now you've got a bunch of benefits for the low D. So one of the challenges with somebody who likes to be intentional with how they move forward.
Well, a lot of time, what the challenges are that are so used to moving so fast that they don't always have a pattern, right? Versus that somebody that's more, or like a higher C would be more regimen on system for the most part.
Yep.
Because they're used to a predictable outcome, right?
So that's why I love, instead of looking at it and going, okay, what are the strengths of the high D? What are the strengths of the low C? If I just say the high C likes to keep moving forward, what are the strengths that come with that? You have them. If I say, what are the weaknesses? You have them.
Right.
That's why I like that approach, is because it just simplifies everything. So high I, they love talking to people, but really what it is they're looking for the volley, the back and forth. So if you have somebody who is constantly looking for the back and the forth, what are the strengths? They tend to care about other people. They tend to be very amiable. They tend to be social, outgoing. They tend to be able to carry a conversation and engage. Wouldn't that fit with everything that you know about a high?
Yeah.
Okay. So what are the weaknesses? The weaknesses include things like, they talk too much.
Yeah, high
You get them to be quiet, right? But that's what they say the weaknesses are of a high I. But if you have somebody who likes to be intentional and likes to engage, those are going to be weaknesses. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So without going into like all of them, but the high I, it's about the volley, the back and forth. Low I is about introspection, time to be able to reflect on the information. So if you're trying to speed things up and you're trying to go back and forth, does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Right.
It's like you need to stop and let them process. But the benefit is that they'll see things in that processing that you're going to miss. Strengths and weakness.
Yeah. So now, like, best practices for business and then personal relationship.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's because I think of a lot of cases, especially personal relationship, significant others are usually opposite, right? I mean, that's like, I'd say opposite of highs, although me and my wife just did ours and we weren't that opposite.
Nope.
Not as opposite.
It's actually not opposites.
Huh.
It's not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Because the challenge is you get people who have very similar personalities. They're one type of relationship dynamic. You have people who have very opposite personality types. It's a different relationship dynamic, but they both exist.
Well, I think of ones that are higher Ds, especially a high D. Usually you're seeing that, like, I think of when we go into a house to meet somebody, like there's one that's more dominant than the other. So it's just spectrum of how much, again, spectrum, because, here you talk about the high D and so forth, but one is always more dominant to go show you around. Hey, somebody wants to be, hey, this is all the things that we've done and blah, 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 going through the house. And then when you're talking, the high D then just wants you like, get to the point. They don't want to hear all the marketing, just get to the point.
Right.
Where the other one's usually a little bit more caring and slower. So what I'm saying opposites because of spectrums again. So that's what I would say is not so much opposite, but a waist lower on spectrums.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because it's like if you listen to the languaging, just as I'm listening to you talk, it's like one is a little bit more directive, the other is more caring. The presupposition of that is that the person who's directing and pushing isn't caring.
Sometimes less caring, right? Or less caring to other people outside their household, or
What does how direct your communication do with how caring you are?
say that again. Let's see.
How direct you are with your communication. Because if I'm talking with
if somebody doesn't want to hurt somebody's feelings, right?
Right, but maybe it has nothing to do with hurting someone's feelings, because the high D doesn't want to hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
But at the same point, the high D is really like, I care enough about you, I'm going to be direct.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting there and going, well, and there may be this thing as a high D, you're now wasting my time, wasting my energy. You don't care about how I feel.
Right.
You care about how you feel. Technically, both profiles, the high and the low, don't care about the other one's feelings. They care about their own.
So perspective. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
So when you said that 9 + 9 equals 80, was it 81? Right?
Yeah.
And then, perspective. So if you
8
got to
plus
break
8
that out.
equals 91.
Yeah. Oh, did I say 81? Yeah. So 9 + 9.
No,
So if you
8 plus 8.
8 + 8 equals 91.
Right. And so if you guys write down 8 + 8 equals 91, you look at the equation, you see 8 + 8 equals 91. I'm standing across from you. I go, that equation looks right. And you're like, no, it's wrong. I go, no, it's right. Well, you're looking at an equation that says 8 + 8 equals 91. I'm looking at the exact same equation, but from my perspective, it says 16 equals 8 + 8. So understanding that, we then have a dynamic now where you and I have two conflicting opinions about the same equation, and we're both right.
Yeah. Perspective.
Yep.
So just understanding. So, all right, how would you best use that perspective now for personal?
I would have you draw a dot on a piece of paper and put a circle around it. And the circle is your sphere, everyone you know. The dot represents you. And what I would say is that everyone inside of that circle is right.
Okay.
Which means if you disagree with them, there's something you're missing, something you don't see. But it also presupposes that you're right, which means there's some disconnect between what their reality is and yours that presupposes it's right. So how do you approach this? So then it's really about understanding the other person. They're thinking this way. They're behaving this way. That means, just like you said, they're more caring.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that that's true, because I know a lot of high D personalities who are very caring, and the way that they care is by being direct and blunt with you.
Right.
That is how they care.
Delivery to the other person takes it as offensive.
Uh-huh.
Because they don't know who their audience is.
Right.
So I think it's always delivering, understanding your audience then, and your audience, sometimes your spouse, right? So, or sometimes it's the other people you're saying in the circle.
So if you look at the 4 different categories, so again, the D, the I, the S, and the C, and you recognize who your partner is, being able to have those conversations and mitigate whatever their fears are and feed whatever their strengths are, to be able to bring them back in, regulate them, and have the conversation. So this goes to something we talked about earlier today: seen, safe, accepted, protected. High D looks at the high C and says, why do you get so wrapped up in processes? Well, what if it doesn't work? Well, then just give it a try. I don't understand. Give it a try. Worst case scenario. Well, the high C is looking for predictable results. Give it a try. We'll see. Like, you're not doing anything to support them making that change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's so interesting because we brought that up in our event today, and the one agent stood up and said something, and I was like, because I went up to him in the morning, he didn't know that I knew who he was, and said, hey, it's great to see you, thanks for coming, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'm so-and-so. I was like, yeah, I know who you are, blah, blah. And he's, and then we had good 10, 15 minute, maybe it's 5 to 10 minute conversation. So it was a good conversation, but it was more, just personal and so forth. But he stood up, and when you said that seen, felt?
Seen, safe, accepted, protected.
Yeah. So, he was seen, he felt safe, he was accepted. So all those things is like, all right, that takes their defenses down and helps you communicate the most effectively too.
It helps them feel secure and regulated with you. And that's important because that's where open communication can happen. And so in your relationships, all of your relationships, your personal ones, your business ones, your romantic ones, being able to create a space where the other person feels safe, and you helping navigate and create that allows the relationship to flourish. Mm-hmm. So if you say something and your spouse is insecure and you recognize that they're feeling something, you've got 2 choices. You can keep talking at which point you're talking to their baggage, or you can help them feel seen, safe, accepted, and protected, and go like, hey, honey, I know that you may be feeling something, and I just want you to know that you're incredibly special to me. Like, yeah, but they're this and they're that. I know, honey, but they're not you. And there's something unique about you, which is why I'm in this relationship. And I just want, like, before we move on in this conversation, I'll let you know you have nothing to worry about. And I know that you're going to, and that's okay. I'm not trying to negate their feelings. And that's okay that you feel that way, but I just want you to know that I love you too. See, I'm not disregarding their emotion of insecurity. I'm not going, baby, you have nothing to worry about. I don't understand. Like, what's going on? You're not invalidating their emotion. Right. You're actually just validating their emotion. What they feel is okay. And I'm here and I love you.
Right.
I choose you. So now I'm reassuring you and I'm making your feelings. So it's fine that you don't feel like you're enough, but you are to me. A lot of times we don't say what we need to say. And we don't say it because we're not safe to.
True.
And in all of your relationships, you get to choose how you make someone else feel.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, when people make us feel not safe, most people's response is to then become defensive and react.
So it reminds me of the book Crucial Conversations, right? So it's, have you read that too? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think of that of, all right, suppose you're in the workplace, you have something you feel like you need to say to somebody, but you know they're going to take it wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you start with that? Like, how would you recommend starting a conversation there? Like, hey, I know
all of their objections right up front. In the workplace,
okay.
You've got somebody, and it's like, you got to correct the fact that they're showing up 10 minutes late for work every day. Every day, they're 10 minutes late, and it's really important that they're there on time. But I stay late. But I care about the team. I don't mean to. There's always something that happens. All of these objectives. So, Lee, I know how much you care about this company. And you're always, you put so much extra time in. You stay late, you do the extra work, and anytime I ask you for something, you do. And I just want to recognize how important that is and how valuable that is to me. And I know that things come up and things happen all the time. There has been a pattern now of showing up late for work, and it's showing up pretty consistently about 10 minutes late. And we really need to shift that to earlier. You, being triggered, may say something along the lines of, yeah, well, but this wasn't this, it was this. I said, I know. I already acknowledged that wasn't your intent and that it's not intentional. Yeah, but I also stay late. I know. I also recognized. So whatever they're going to come back with, mm-hmm. if you address it up front, then you can, when they go, yeah, but, you go, right, no. But you don't go, oh, I already said this. It's not a fight.
Right.
You're like, no, I agree. But I really do care about the company. I know you do. That's why you put so much time and effort in.
Right.
This is what I need. So you take all of these different things where they're like, yeah, but. It's like, those are all true. And we're still going to do this. The energy that I would liken it to, I've got a 4-year-old.
Okay.
And when I'm putting her in her car seat, sometimes she throws a temper tantrum. And the energy that I have when she throws her temper tantrum is, I hope you always behave like this when someone tries to force you against your will to do what you're going to do, and I'm still putting you in your car seat.
Right. Exactly.
Totally okay with the behavior, because I want to teach you. If some guy is picking you up and forcing you into their car, this is totally an okay behavior. I'm your dad, and I'm still going to do it.
For sure. All right. So how has behavioral assessment and understanding and all that, how's that helped you the most in the past?
Compassion.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So let's hit on that, because it sounded like your first job, you had a lot of compassion, right?
No, I hated people. People drove me nuts, and I was horrible. I was like, okay, here's the thing. Get out of my way, or I'm going to run you over. And when I'd say that, I would tie you down just so that I could run you over, because it was more fun that way. And the challenge is that nobody saw me, and I felt a lot of resentment because people weren't looking at me. And so I went, fine, screw them. And I didn't. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to go this route. But when I learned to start to see people I started to have more compassion for them, going, they're not wrong, they're just different. And as I did that, I started to actually build compassion for me. How have the assessments helped me? Because they've given me fluidity and the ability to go, it's not you versus me. You're a high D, I'm not. I'm a 99 D when I test. Everyone's like, oh my God, yeah, he's a high D. I'm not. I'm not a high D. I make decisions quickly. No. I'm very intentional. Every decision, I just got really fast at analyzing information. So if you look at the technical application of the high D personality type, I actually like to be very intentional with everything I do. I just do it faster than everybody else.
Now, has yours changed over the years?
Oh, yeah.
So was it all a 99?
No, it's always been a high D, high I.
Okay.
But I also know that it's not a real high D, high I, because for me, everything's about intention. I actually don't want it to keep moving. I feel more comfortable when we slow down.
Okay. Has that changed now? Like I think of you becoming a father, like different things, the milestones in your life, right?
Different milestones, different life events can drastically change your behavior and your profile, but so can coping mechanisms. So for me, like I said, with that high D versus the low D, I needed to be a high D.
Okay.
So I became a high D, and I did so by processing, but then that became my default. Same thing. I was a high altruistic. So I made the money be scholarships. So my economic went up, my altruistic went down. Now I'm like, I don't really have capacity. My people help people. I don't do that anymore. So my like charity stuff, I don't do as much because now I help the people who can do that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
And so the more that I understood the spectrums, the more I understood human behavior, human psychology, the more I could sit down across from somebody and recognize the person's not their behavior. Who I'm sitting and talking to isn't all the things they do. It's not how they show up. It's not how they say. There's something intrinsically valuable in who you are. And I love to see it. And my goal, every conversation, is to be able to look at someone in the eyes and go, I see you.
Did a lot of that come with age? Did it come with changes in life, or did it come with just a deeper understanding? Because you have so many, I think of the understanding on all the different behavioral assessments and so forth.
Over 50 different assessments and stuff that I've looked at or studied or whatever. It actually came from healing myself. Everything that you reject in somebody else is something you reject in yourself. Oh my God, they're so selfish. Okay, so why is taking care of yourself not okay?
Right. Yeah,
oh my God, this person, they're so loud. I can't get them to shut up. Okay, so where are you not speaking your voice? Everything that you see around you is a projection of something inside of you. And everything around you, if you can just simply learn to appreciate it, you learn to appreciate those aspects of yourself. And if you can't appreciate it outside, then appreciate it inside, and you'll be able to see it out.
Do you think a lot of this came from childhood? I mean, is it from assessments? Like, does a lot of this stuff come from your childhood? And if so, how do you change? Like, how can you change that too? Or can you change it? Or just is it just knowing your strengths and weaknesses?
There's two different folds. I mean, you can change it, or you can change your environment. It comes from developmental. It comes from childhood. Some of it's nature. Some of it's nurture. Some of it is who you are. But you can change anything. The question is it worth it?
Right.
Does it feel like it's worth it? Some of the changes take a lot of work. Some don't. So it's about becoming fluid in who you are and being solid in who you are at the same time. Again, dichotomies without there being a conflict. And so I know exactly who I am, and I can show up however I need because that's still me. Because it's part of who I am, is that I'm flexible.
So I think of your 20-year-old self, right? And who you are now. So I think of mainly is that the understanding of all the profiles, because I think of our
NLP, psychology, hypnosis, MER, all the different profile types. Everything that I did when I was studying helped me be able to understand different people's perspectives, and understanding breeds empathy. Understanding breeds empathy. And when you have empathy for somebody else, you have more capacity, but then you also have it for yourself.
Yeah. So you didn't have empathy in the beginning. When you were you said you were going to run through them. Like,
yes and no. I didn't have, I would say I didn't have sympathy. I didn't care. I could feel what everyone else felt. I just didn't care.
Okay.
But the empathy, like really feeling it and connecting with them and holding space for them, it wasn't something that I had. I didn't care to.
Yeah. So for our audience, do you think the like first thing is, like I always think of self-development, right? So we need to work on ourselves more than anything else. So I think of, hey, get a profile done, read the report. That's half of it. Is like, all right, don't just scan, like look at it. If you have not done a disc assessment, read, because what are they, at least 25, like the first part's 25 pages or so.
Yeah.
And then have an understanding of the strengths, the weaknesses, and know where you fall on spectrums. And the spectrum's not a bad thing, because some people are like, oh, they're on the spectrum. No. Where do you fall on the graph? If you want to use a different verbiage. And then look at their strengths and weaknesses, and where would you take it from there? Like, just so they have a better understanding to improve, how do they improve their life? How do they get more out of life?
Create an environment where your success is dependent upon your strengths and your weaknesses are mitigated by people, process, habit, or choice.
Say that again, slower.
So in the early 2000s, Intermetrics commissioned a study to look at what allowed people to perform at their best. And they found there were 2 acquired skills that everybody had. It was self-awareness, knowing who they were, what their strengths and their weaknesses, and authenticity. They created an environment where their success was dependent upon their strengths and their weaknesses were mitigated by people or process.
Okay.
I added habit or choice.
Okay.
So when you figure out what your strengths are, find or create an environment where that defines your success.
Yeah. Okay.
And if there's things you need to do that aren't your strength, mitigate them with people, hiring somebody, process, create a structure, habit, make it so you don't have to think about it, it just happens, or choice, knowing it's not your strength, choosing to do it anyway. So if you can mitigate people, process, habit, choice, and then create the rest of it is dependent upon your strength, you win.
So surround yourself with the right team
Yes.
of people. And so I think of, that helps feed into what we do here. So I think of my team, we always did disc assessments on them and see where their like strengths and weaknesses are. So we could plug them into, like, because the buyer side versus the listing side is so different. Like one side's so much more detailed. And what I would see is if we put somebody in the wrong role, they didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like they would maybe be good at it, but they didn't have any enjoyment at it. Like I think when my son first started working in the business, we had him on the buy side and he did okay. He did like 20 deals a year, but he wasn't like setting any records and he just wasn't like, eh. But then we moved to the listing side and automatically he doubled his sales. And he had more enjoyment in what he was doing because it was more fitting his natural personality. And then he had the admin staff around him that you're surrounding yourself with the opposite of you of, hey, somebody else that has all the strengths that you don't have.
Right.
So I think that, and so understanding that, I think that's why so many companies do the disc assessments too, or different personality profiles to make sure, hey, do I have the right person on the bus? And now let's get them in the right seat.
And make sure that the bus is designed for the people. This is another issue that a lot of people have. A director of ops, they're supposed to do these 8 things. Okay, but what if you take this one thing away from the director of ops and give it to them? What if you just take that one responsibility away and give it to somebody else and then take one of these responsibilities, give it to them? You can custom tailor the position. It doesn't have to be what it's supposed to be. Yeah. You can do it. And have grace that people's profiles change over time, which means everything needs to be a fluid. It's a living organization.
Yeah, but I think that so many times, it's like where you said about the high D, I see that just so many times over and over. And I'm like, all right, but what is the rest of it? And what is your motivators?
Yep.
So I think that just comes into the decision making and so forth. So anything else? How about, so we talked briefly on perspective. So anything else perspective that you want to hit? I mean, I just think of writing out that equation. When I looked at that and then you flip it over and you're like, oh, that does make sense now. I see their side. But anything else on perspective?
2 million bits of information. And you process 100. You process 126.
Out of 2 million.
Out of 2 million.
So that's why they always say, well, you retain like 10% after so much time.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not even a lot of time.
So
Minutes.
126 bits out of 2 million. Don't get so wrapped up that your reality is right and that someone else's is wrong.
That's a great statement.
2 million bits, you process 126. Don't get so wrapped up that your reality is right and someone else's is wrong.
All right.
You just grabbed a different handful. That's all.
Anything else you want to add?
I think that like everybody, one of the biggest challenges, so I work with suicide, depression, anxiety, PTSD. I help people come, and most of the time it's because they don't feel seen and they don't feel like they're okay. And so I just want to look, you're okay. just as you are. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're just in an environment that may not be perfectly suited for who you are. So either you need to adapt or you need to adapt your environment. But you, who you are, infinitely powerful, valuable, safe, and loved. Remember that, and you can do anything. So simple.
Somebody reach you.
If you want to reach me, you can find me, my disc guy on Instagram. You can get me at my website, youdon'tknowdisc.com, or you can go to mydiscguy.com, which takes you to my media page, talks a little bit more about my background and some of the stuff I'm doing. Okay. And I've run a class every month or so called Unlocking the Secrets of Leadership and Influence. If you guys really want to dive into increasing your influence, your ability to lead, to understand what triggers somebody, how do you psychologically build trust and leadership and relationship, get people to follow your lead, and really empower your people to thrive. If you go to youdon'tknowdisc.com/YDKD, you don't know disc.
Okay.
The next class at the time of the recording is December 22nd, yeah. But that's constantly being updated with new dates and times as the classes are released.
All right, good. And did you have a special on that or something too that you're doing beforehand or no?
Yeah. So for anyone who's interested and wants to sign up, if you want to go to if you want to use the coupon code Podcast Live.
Okay.
Podcast Live will give you, I think it's like $300 off of the class.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody, and reach out to Alex. So it's awesome to have you here. Thanks so much for traveling all the way. That's what you're on an entire no sleep, being up for 24 hours and traveling all night's always a fun day. So
well, thank you so much for having me. It is so nice to watch and work with somebody who is so adaptive in their leadership and really like to listen to your team talk about things. It's like they've found a space where they feel safe and vulnerable to be able to open up, which says a lot about you as a leader, how you show up and what kind of an environment you've created for your people. So thank you for being that, and thank you for having me on today.
Appreciate it. All right. Thanks so much.